This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of the Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, Chief Operating Officer of the WBC, and today my co-host and WBC Advisory Council member Linda Peak-Shack is joined by Katherine Valentine of Worthmore Strategies on her tips for women successfully negotiating their worth in today's business environment. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 70 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. Helmed by Edie Frazier as our founder and CEO, our leadership is a diverse board of directors and advisory and leader councils that include more than 34% people of color. Check out our 9 key initiatives and join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. And please sign up for our upcoming Action for Impact Summit through the link in the chat. Each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showing the importance of cross-generational collaboration and the allyship of men in the movement. So Linda, let's get started.
Thanks, Gwen. Well, as you said, for this month's focus on the power of women's vision and voice, we turn to Katherine Valentine, founder of Worthmore Strategies, a consulting firm focused on achieving gender parity in the workplace by empowering women to ask for what they need to be happy, productive, and successful in their careers. Katherine's work has been featured in Adweek, Working Mother, Forbes, and Fast Company. And she's here today to give us tips on negotiating in the post-COVID environment. We're going to learn about her research that has informed her culture-changing work with major companies and with individual women. So Katherine, welcome. I want to begin with your research-based approach. You know, a week or two ago, we had Ellen Snee, who had studied with Gilligan at Harvard several decades ago. You have studied the work of Hannah Riley Bowles, more recently focusing at Harvard on women and negotiation. Tell us about the research for your MBA and what you found about how women negotiate and how that differs from men.
Linda, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm so excited to chat with you today. I think to kind of answer that question, I was getting my MBA and I went to have a negotiation with my current employer at that point in time. And I did all the things that I thought you were supposed to do, right? I took the negotiations course. I Googled it. I spent weeks preparing. I did all of my benchmarking, like always kind of checking those boxes. And I went in and I walked into that room, one of their top candidates, and I walked out. Absolutely. There was no doubt I was not going to get that job. And I tried to figure out I did everything I was supposed to, what went wrong. And so I had the fortune of having a year left on my MBA. So I just spent that year studying the research, and Hannah's research is the best out there. Right. And it was, the thing that struck me the most was actually 2 things. One, that negotiation was being taught as if it were gender neutral, and it's actually a highly gender specific skill. So what my brother can do and be successful is very different from what I can do and be successful. And the second thing that I learned that blew my mind is that there was a solution. There are all these things that as women in the workplace we encounter where there isn't a clear solution. Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do that. We'll try and community source the right way to navigate this, but we don't really know. In this one place, there is a solution. It's what Hannah and other researchers have been proving for decades, that there is a very specific way to negotiate successfully as a woman. And I was blown away that I felt like that the research was incredible, but it hadn't been connected to the women who could use it. And had I found it, 5 days earlier, what would have been different about my career? So I set out to try and bring the research, the great research that was happening, to the women who can really use it in their everyday lives.
Well, let's talk a minute about why it's important for women to undertake learning about negotiating and how they need to know it's different from the way men negotiate as they go into their own ask of the people at their company?
So there's a couple of reasons why it's important for women to learn and negotiate. The first one, and I think the one that people most commonly think about, is that financial impact, right? So research by Linda Babcock shows that there's about $1 million difference over the course of your career for women who negotiate versus don't. And then Margaret Neal's research out of Stanford shows that that equates to about 8 additional years of needing to work if you choose not to negotiate throughout your career, right? So if we look at the gender wealth gap, this is a tool that we can use. The second reason, which I think is not as well advertised, is that learning how to negotiate, or what we like to think of as self-advocacy skills, can really accelerate your trajectory in your career, right? You can create space to focus on the most important tasks that drive forward the company and therefore that you will be rewarded for. But you can also avoid burnout by negotiating away all of those non-promotable tasks that tend to land on our plates. The third reason that, and this is where Hannah, again, is really pushing the boundaries here, but she is starting to show that giving women advocacy skills can predict whether or not they stay in paid employment once they become mothers. And so learning how to have those conversations can have a huge impact on the culture and the space that we're able to create for women at work.
And we'll talk about that in just a minute, because you're doing amazing work with companies on that. But let's stay with individual women for a moment. What is holding women back? Why are they not stepping up to negotiate?
The fear of backlash is the number one reason that's holding women back, right? We have all heard of stories of, exactly what happened to me, which is that I asked to be paid what I thought was fair and ended up not even getting the job. It's people who were getting promoted at very quick rates, and then they negotiated flexible work hours, and all of a sudden they're not getting promoted anymore. All of a sudden they're thought of differently, right? We hear all of these stories of the backlash that occurs when women advocate on their own behalf. And Linda, the way that people talk about this, we're not making this up, right? Backlash is real. Women should be afraid of it. And so it's not, I think sometimes when we go about this conversation, it's why aren't women asking? It's kind of our fault. It's not our fault. There's a really high cost to asking as a woman. And I think learning how to lower that cost, which is what we'll talk about in a minute, is key to being able to advocate for yourself in the workplace and hopefully actually change the mold of, make it a more inclusive place as we each can advocate for what we need to be successful.
Yeah, well, let's talk about your 75 tips for how women can negotiate, and particularly your formula, your communal ask. They seem particularly important, all of these tips, in a post-COVID world when women are leaving the workforce and companies are trying to keep them. Can you talk about those tips and your formula?
Sure. And let's separate that out. So one thing that I think happens a lot in women's leadership is there is the list of like 88 things you need to do. And it is impossible to walk into a negotiation conversation and keep in mind all of those, right? So the list of what we have are things that you can negotiate, which we'll talk about in a second. But we've actually taken all of that and boiled it down into a strategy. There's just one thing that you need to remember, right? And it's the communal ask. So what the communal ask is, and I'll give you the formula in a second, but we know from research that the communal ask virtually eliminates the risk of backlash. Backlash is caused when women act in a way that is counter to how we feel authentic or is counter to what somebody expects of us. So generally speaking, women are great team players. We're very empathetic, and we're others focused. Instead of negotiating competitively where those strengths hurt us, we're going to change the rules of the game a little bit, and we're going to negotiate in a way that where we are on a level playing field. The way that we're going to do that is kind of two parts. Part one, we want to negotiate collaboratively instead of competitively. So instead of it being me versus you, there's a winner and a loser, we're going to set it up to be us versus the problem, right? So Linda, if I worked for you, me being able to deliver as much impact as I can is important for me and for you, right? And so that's kind of the way we want to think about it. The formula that we can use to set that up is the communal ask formula. And so it is your past performance plus the future vision plus your ask, and making sure that that ask, acknowledges the impact of it on others. So for example, if I were going to ask for a promotion instead of saying, I deserve to be promoted, I would say something like, as you know, we were able to deliver X million dollars in revenue last year. We're on our way to increasing that by 10% this year. In order to deliver on that, I wanted to talk about getting a director title, which will enable me to open more doors externally and have more clients get on the phone with me more quickly, right? That's a win-win. That's a way for me to deliver more impact to the company and for myself. And we can talk, Linda, if it's helpful, about all the flexibility asks in there too.
I'd like to, yes.
Because
it goes beyond salary, right? It goes beyond the money.
So if you're interested, to everyone that's watching, if you go to worthmorenegotiations.com, there's a list of 75 things you can negotiate that you can download. This is what Linda was talking about, where it's everything from, yes, some of them are compensation related, but there's opportunities to increase your impact. There's opportunities to get support so that you can be more successful. We know that men negotiate much larger teams than women do, and that means that they can get more done. There's examples of how you can negotiate flexibility and a bunch of other things. So I encourage you to, if you want the list of 75 things we've helped women negotiate, go to worthmorenegotiations.com and download it there. And Linda, to kind of run an example through the pipes on flexibility, I was so excited. We worked with a woman named Courtney recently, who is a single mom. She's an accountant. She's incredibly brilliant. She has sole custody of her 2 children. And so when she got another job offer, for her at this point in time, she knows she can do the job. It's, can she get the flexibility she needs to be the mom she wants to be? And so instead of saying, well, I can't accept this, or in order to accept this, I need X, Y, and Z, she goes in with, as you know, at my last company, I was able to deliver Y. I believe I'm perfectly positioned to give this to you here for the following reasons. In order to deliver on that, I need to make sure my kids are taken care of. What would you think about giving me, time off to go to their school activities and additional sick days for my kids so that I don't have to use my own sick days when my kids are sick? But also, if you've ever tried to work from home when your kid is sick, it's almost an impossible task. So she was negotiating days to not have to do that. And they were really thrilled to be able to bring her onto the team. And they did give her additional sick days for her kids. And anytime her kids have a school event, she just gets the time off. She doesn't have to ask. That was a huge burden off of her. So now she can focus more on delivering value at work.
That's great. And we are dropping the link to your company as well as the link to the ways you can negotiate into the chat for those who are interested. You're talking about the way companies can respond. So your work has led you now to spend most of your time with major companies who see the value in teaching women how to negotiate. You do it in 3 different ways: the power hour that you do, the manager workshops, and then your big one, the leadership cohort. Can you talk about the companies you're working with and the thousands of women that have gone through these programs so that people might be able to bring it to their company as well?
Sure. And Linda, this just gives me so much hope, right? We are in an era where companies are paying me to teach their employees how to negotiate because they now know that it's not a zero-sum game. If your if your employee is happier, more productive, less stressed, that's great for them, and it's great for the company. And so we're working with, a top 3 bank, a top 5 consulting firm, a very large tech player, amongst others. We do that advocacy training that equips women to identify and ask for what they need to be successful. The way that looking at that main one, which we deliver the biggest impact in, the way that starts is a company gets an impact assessment, which is what's your flight risk, what factors are driving your women to consider leaving or to not be as productive as they could be. And then we customize content around that. It's usually a 4 to 6 week training. And then we measure, again, the output and look at what that difference is. So we piloted this across 4 different industries last year. And one of the companies that we worked with had a 50% reduction in the number of women saying that they were highly likely or likely to leave that year. And so if we look at that, what that means for that company, right now they're fully staffed, they can deliver on their growth goals. They have an extra $1.2 million to spend on something that isn't recruiting. And their recruiters aren't all quitting because they're not all burnt out, right? So their days to fill those roles went down too. This is just one of those, it's based on kind of a simple insight, which is that women know what they need to succeed. It's just that the cost to asking for those things has been too high. And if we can bring that cost down by teaching a gendered way to go about these conversations, then all of a sudden you're unlocking value all over your corporation.
Well, this is what I love, because you're not just working with individual women, but you're actually changing the culture, which is what WBC is all about. It also means that you believe in something WBC believes in strongly, and that is the allyship of men. Can you talk a little bit about how the men you're working with see your work and see this notion of helping women negotiate?
Sure. So, men are such an important part of this change. And actually, I have to say that it's men with daughters that I find have been the strongest advocates in the workplace, because they tell their daughters, you can be anything that you want to be. And then all of a sudden they see all the ways in which that might not be as true as we want it to be. What I think I love about this is the men that come to us, and actually more than half of the companies we've been invited into by a man. A male is our main sponsor. The men that come to us and want to bring this into their organization know that we're leaving value on the table by not getting everything we can out of all of our employees. And they look at the burnout rates of women, and they look at the fact that 1 in 3 women are thinking about leaving, 2 out of 3 women of color, right? And they know that their corporation is better if we can keep and support that talent.
Great. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I hope we can leave our audience with what are the common mistakes that women make in negotiation? And let's leave our audience with some tips on what not to do and what to remember to do.
Sure. So I would say when I think about common mistakes, there's kind of like a big 4 that I see. One is we assume the world is fixed, and so we don't see the opportunity to negotiate. This is because of all of we get this message every day, right? Women are supposed to be other focused. Men get to be more about themselves, right? And so it's almost in the world around, you almost even breathe it in, this idea that I can't change what's happening. That's kind of the first mistake we see. Advocating for yourself is all about thinking about what it could look like and then taking the steps to get there. The second mistake we see is that women, we wait until our back is up against the wall. Negotiation is much more effective as an offensive move as opposed to a defensive move. Once your back's against the wall, you don't have a lot of other options. You're exhausted, you're burnout, you're not your best self. That's not going to give you the best results. The best results is when you're constantly thinking, how can I be doing more, differently, better? And then proactively having those discussions. The third mistake we see is women thinking that as we get promoted, this will fix itself. If you look at the gender pay gap, it's actually 82% on average, but it's 74% as you get up to that first and second rung, and then it's 55% at the VP level. And so we know that these things aren't going to fix themselves. We know that men negotiate bigger teams. We know that men negotiate 5 times as many stock options and 30% more equity. We know these things. And so it's not something that we can ignore for forever. Might as well build those skills early, right? And then the third mistake we see is that as women, we tend to undervalue ourselves. We're actually really good predictors of other people's value, but we are notoriously poor at predicting our own value. And so I highly recommend that you find that group of women who can hold you up and hold you accountable when you say, I'm thinking about asking for X, what do you think? And they're all like, nope, too low, right? What I would recommend that you can do if you want to keep going on this journey and learning more is if you sign up at our website, worthmorenegotiations.com, the first thing you'll get is that email of 75 things you can advocate for. The second thing you're going to get a few days later is a link to our online course, which we used to charge about $500 for, and now we're just giving to the community for free, but it'll walk you through in 45 minutes from I want to ask for something to having a foolproof plan at the end. And we hope that can be a good resource for your community as well.
Thanks so much for that tip, for the resource, and for helping us understand how to have a vision and exercise our voice to claim what we are worth. So Gwen, now that Katherine has sent us off to negotiate, tell us who we're going to hear from next week and remind our audience of our upcoming summit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. And thank you, Katherine, for the great tips. And I love I went from 75 to the foolproof plan, so I'm in. But thanks all of you for joining us. So first is please register for our upcoming summit, which is September 21st and 22nd, where you'll have about a day and a half of 10 CEO award winners and 6 trailblazers, all advocating for gender equity and diversity. But also go to our website and learn more about our efforts to increase women in the C-suite and boardroom, to address the underrepresentation of women in access to capital in certain industries, and how we advance the pipeline of women leaders that are going to bring further gender and pay parity, diversity, equity, inclusion to the business landscape. Join our movement. And as Linda mentioned, join us here next week, June 2nd, when I talk with Khalil Smith and Liz Doherty of Akamai Technologies on inclusion and diverse leadership with an emphasis on inclusion. Have a great Thursday and happy Memorial Day weekend.